Once upon a time in a big city, there was a tyrant king who ruled over the land with an iron fist. He kept everyone under his thumb, and anyone who dared to speak up against him would simply disappear. No one dared to question his authority or defy his unjust laws. People lived in fear, hiding in their homes after sunset, hoping to avoid becoming victims of the king's brutality. Even the slightest whisper of discontent could lead to imprisonment or worse. The city, once vibrant and full of life, had become a shadow of its former self. Under the king's oppressive rule, it was like living in a never-ending nightmare. But then something remarkable happened. A young man named Yusef appeared on the scene with a group of enthusiastic young people just like you and me. Together, they were planning to challenge the status quo and bring about positive change for their community. These young people were part of the new generation, a generation that had grown up amidst the information and technology revolution. They were connected to each other through social media and other online platforms, sharing ideas and plans for creating a better future for themselves and their city. They were not afraid of the king or his army because they had something that the king and his army didn't have: the power of unity and solidarity. Yusef and his comrades started off by organizing small gatherings in secret locations around the city, attracting people from all walks of life who were fed up with the king's tyranny. At first, their protests were peaceful. They sang songs, recited poems, and told stories about a better future that they dreamed of. It was a breath of fresh air in a city that had been suffocating under the weight of oppression. However, they soon realized that if they wanted to be heard, they needed to make a bigger statement. So they decided to hold a large demonstration right in the middle of the city. They chose a symbolic location, the King's Square, right in front of the palace. This decision was met with mixed reactions. Some people were excited and eager to participate, while others were too afraid and preferred to stay hidden in their homes. Meanwhile, the king and his army were not happy about these growing protests. They saw any form of dissent as a threat to their power, and they were determined to put an end to it. The king sent his spies to gather intelligence on the protesters, tracking their movements and listening to their conversations. His goal was to identify the leaders and crush the movement before it gained any momentum. As the day of the demonstration approached, tensions began to rise. People were making preparations, gathering in small groups to discuss strategies and assign roles. There was a sense of excitement in the air, but also a feeling of unease. Everyone knew that this was a risky move and that they could face severe consequences if they were caught. On the day of the demonstration, everything seemed to be going well. People from all over the city gathered in the square, waving banners and chanting slogans, demanding freedom and democracy. They were a diverse group, united by their common desire for change. There were students, workers, housewives, and even some members of the clergy. All of them had had enough of the king's tyranny, and they were ready to stand up for their rights. But as the demonstration went on, things started to get out of hand. The police arrived on the scene, attempting to disperse the crowd and arrest the leaders. People panicked and started running in different directions. The police were brutal and used excessive force to break up the demonstration. They beat people with batons, kicked them, and even used tear gas and water cannons. The protesters were not prepared for this level of violence, and they quickly began to retreat. Amidst all the chaos and violence, Yusef tried to keep calm and focused. He knew that this was a critical moment and that the actions he took now would have a significant impact on the future of the movement. As the situation escalated, Yusef realized that they needed to find a way to defend themselves. He called for a peaceful resistance, urging people to stand firm and not give in to fear. He believed that if they could hold their ground, they could send a message to the king that they were not afraid and that they would not be intimidated. Despite the violence and intimidation, people stood their ground. They formed human shields, protecting the most vulnerable and ensuring that no one was left behind. It was a powerful display of solidarity and courage, leaving the police and the king's army stunned. They had expected the protesters to scatter and flee, but they had underestimated the strength of the movement. In the midst of the struggle, Yusuf noticed that the police were aiming their weapons at the protesters, firing directly at them. It was a dangerous situation, and he knew that something had to be done to protect the people. Without hesitation, Yusuf stepped forward and placed himself between the protesters and the police. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace and called for calm. His bravery was contagious, and people followed his lead, lowering their defensive barriers and holding their ground. The police hesitated for a moment, taken aback by Yusuf's courage and the determination of the protesters. It was a tense standoff, but it gave Yusuf an opportunity to negotiate. He spoke to the police, appealing to their humanity and reminding them that they were also citizens of the kingdom and had families to return to. He urged them to consider the consequences of their actions and the impact they would have on the future of the city. Just when it seemed like Yusuf might succeed in de-escalating the situation, things took a violent turn. Suddenly a gunshot was fired, and Yusuf fell to the ground, clutching his chest. There was a moment of silence as people looked on in shock and horror. Then chaos erupted. People started screaming, running and throwing objects at the police. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. In the midst of the chaos, Yusuf was taken to a nearby hospital where doctors fought to save his life. His condition was critical, and there was fear that he might not survive. Meanwhile, the city erupted in protest. People poured into the streets, chanting Yusuf's name and demanding justice. They marched on the palace, calling for the king to be held accountable. As the protests grew, the king and his army became increasingly desperate. They tried to restore order, but their efforts only led to more violence and instability. It was clear that the situation had gotten out of hand and that they could not continue to hold on to power. After days of uncertainty, Yusuf was released from the hospital, but he was forever changed by the experience. The gunshot wound had left him weak, and he required ongoing medical care. Despite his physical pain, Yusuf was determined to continue the fight for freedom and democracy. He knew that the sacrifices he had made had not been in vain, and that his story had inspired others to stand up for what they believed in. As Yusuf recovered, the king and his advisors realized that they needed to make changes in order to regain control of the city. They agreed to release political prisoners, lift some of the oppressive laws, and allow for peaceful protests. It was a small step towards democracy, but it was a start. With the support of the people, Yusuf and his comrades continued to push for change. They organized peaceful demonstrations, rallies, and strikes, demanding a complete overhaul of the political system. Their courage and determination paid off, and slowly but surely the city began to transform. Years passed, and the city became a beacon of democracy and freedom. Yusuf and his comrades had succeeded in bringing about real change and inspiring others around the world to do the same. They had shown that even in the face of great adversity, ordinary people could come together and make extraordinary things happen. Now, whenever people gathered in the King's Square, it was to celebrate the progress they had made and to honor the memory of those who had fallen. The square, once a symbol of oppression and tyranny, had become a symbol of hope and freedom. The people of the city knew that they had a long way to go, but they were confident that they could overcome any challenge if they remained united and committed to the cause. And so, the story of Yusuf and his comrades became a legend, passed down from generation to generation. It was a reminder that the fight for freedom and democracy is never easy, but that it is always worth fighting for.